Morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
I am really good. So where am I?
Well, I recognize the rock-bound Maine coast, so that must be one of the lighthouses. And of course, there's nothing on the horizon. So or rather, Europe's on the horizon.
Yes, yes, exactly. And just a few things in between. Yeah, that is called the Portland Head Lighthouse. The Portland Head Lighthouse
Yes,
in
very
Maine
nice looking.
with a fairly strong wind blowing there. Uh,
Yes, indeed.
and taken about, I want to say, 2 weeks ago. So it looks like it's cold where you are, Deirdre.
We've been having a cold spell. Let me put it this way. The wind chill this morning was -2.
There we go. There we
Yeah.
go. Yeah, it was tough here in the high desert. I was just, you know, short sleeves today.
Darn.
70 degrees during the day. Yes, yes, 70 degrees during the day. The only ice is in my coffee at the moment. Um, is the media helping or hurting, Deirdre?
Fascinating question. It depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for entertainment, they're helping because because there's so much entertainment out there.
There
If
really is.
you're business builders the way we are, I've got to say the media is not helping. They're confusing the issue.
Yeah.
And it's for multiple reasons, Tom, that there are so many media sources out there, each of them with its own point of view, its own selection of stories, its own political positioning, and so forth, that unless you're aware of what's going on, and unless you multiply, I'm jumping right to one of our conclusions here, but we'll fill in. Unless you multiply your sources of media intake, you're not going to be getting the information you need to be making valid business decisions. And I see this all the time. As you know, Tom, I go to the gym several days a week and spend an hour on the treadmill. And I have in front of me TV screens. Anyone who's been to a gym knows the scenario. Now, I don't use headphones, so I only see the captions on them. But that's a fascinating way to pick up the differences among the media sources. Now, and I'm there in the morning, primetime media, when everyone is dressing and getting out the door to work. So this should be where the various sources are coming out with their main stuff. And I get in front of me, I get five screens. I have everything from Fox to MSNBC with CNBC, local stations, and so forth. And what strikes me the most, and I'm coming at this from someone who's dealt with publishing and knowledge management and so forth, is the selection of the stories. It's not so much what you say about each topic as even just having the opportunity to say it. It's which stories you select, which set a basic framework for what information you're going to convey. And when you look across these screens, you can see that they're all talking about different things. They all have different priority stories. They all have different secondary stories. They all have different types of commenters on the various stories out there. Now, obviously, CNBC is going to be talking about financial issues, but even so, it has a political aspect to it. There's always a political aspect to finance. So, what political stories are they going to select? So, if you just watch one of the business channels, any of the business channels, you're only going to get a certain perspective. And where this becomes important, Tom, is that we're scarcely the first to say that each media source has developed a political point of view. And then there's the multiplication of sources, not just the traditional media, but all of the different channels, different commenters, all of the people who are now getting their seats in the White House briefing room, in the Pentagon briefing room, and so forth. So that, repeating again, if you're not tapping into a multiplicity of sources, you're only getting a partial story. And why we think this is important is just the change is overwhelming. And if you're not keeping up with not only what is changing by tapping into all of the different sources of stories, but also what this might mean for your business. And that's where getting the commentary from all of the different sources becomes important. Then it's going to be a lot harder for you to figure out what you do in terms of building your business. And I'll stop here, Tom, and throw it over to you for.
But we see a little bit of a lull. Now, there could be a lot of reasons for this. One is only one part of the Congress is in session, just the Senate. The House is working on their districts, and next week we'll have both back. That could be it. I also, like you, have a sense that there's some pending bigger topics that perhaps they're looking at how to message properly, and
Correct.
also big issues to deal with, some of which we'll cover elsewhere. There's the whole issue of what's developing in the AI tech world and all of the different aspects of things going on there. And then there's also the issue of all the activities going on in the Europe and Middle East and Asia and the Far East. We think right now is a time to just hold course as best you can. Don't there's no benefit to trying to do anything of substance yet, because too few things have been laid in stone that we know are going to affect things. The one thing that I would say is, so keep your eye on the macro. Watch for the macro trends. And this is where the media is really not helping us, because they're not helping us identify what are the macro trends that are happening. And then the micro, which is where they're trying to drive us with all these micro changes and micro arguments about a change. Do you have the right to make that change? And is that person have a right to be in that job? And are they following the right process and so forth? That can, as you said, can be incredibly entertaining and can be a sport unto itself. And you and I, there's this aspect of it we do enjoy watching and observing. But those of us don't have a lot of time because we have businesses to operate and businesses to run and families and all kinds of other things. That can be incredibly distracting. So pick out the micros that matter to you, such as things that might actually affect your supply chain or your employees or whatever really affects your business. And then look for the macro. And right now, we think it's time to just hold your course. There'll be a time when you'll have to adjust, right? But we don't see that yet because we don't see enough. We see that the strategy that the administration's using, which is disruption, overwhelming disruption, and change, that's resonating and it's starting to stick. What we're seeing on the opposition is that the point you like to call process power,
Yes.
which is to make the opposing argument about, are you following the process? Are these people allowed to do this? Do they have access? Do they have the right to access? They shouldn't, so you're violating something. Now, like you and I say, that's an entertaining argument, but it doesn't really help us. What we care about when we run a business is you care about following the opportunities, you care about adapting and taking and monetizing those opportunities. And then you use process for scale and some element of control, because if you don't put a process in, it becomes somewhat chaotic. And so if you look at why I think the media is not helping people like you and me so much, is that on the one side, the non-traditional media can look chaotic because it lacks process. Yet on the traditional media side, it's heavily process focused, and even their arguments are process focused, and their interviews are process focused. And as a result, they can be exasperating because for people like us, they're not focusing on the results. They don't care about the results so much. They care more about the process leading to the results, and the results are may or may not be to their liking, but they focus more on the process. So that it can be entertaining and confusing, and like you said, perhaps not even helpful or even hurting,
Right.
depending on what you're trying to see. So that's that's where we are at the moment. That could probably change next week this time and not be where we see things. But I know you have some comments about all this when you want to take a little bit deeper and give us some examples of what are we talking about when we talk about process versus the change argument.
Well, for example, on one channel that is very focused on well, it's on the side of the Democrats. It's very much against the current administration. The stories they select and the people they interview all have to do with, well, they're not doing what we were doing. They seem to be overturning this, but this was a very important rule that we got in place for this reason. Or they seem to be forgetting this, or they seem to have fired the one person who knows this without any understanding that this may be deliberate. There may be reasons, for example, for this administration to be doing it. So if I, as a business builder, and this is probably a time, Tom, for us to repeat what we've said repeatedly. You and I are non-political when we present views here. What I'm trying to present here when talking about specific channels or media and so forth are the sorts of things that our listeners will have to pay attention to if they are watching these channels. That when you hear a repeated argument that, oh, well, they're not doing the same old thing. It would never be the same old thing. They're not doing the same thing that we did. That's a process argument. And you're seeing an awful lot of that out on the various media. What is helpful to people who are trying to build businesses is when someone goes on one of the channels and says, let me tell you what the thinking is underlying this change. And they may say, well, I may not be getting this right, but this is how I interpret this change. That starts to get you forward in things. And what I think it comes back to the three questions that listeners have heard us talking about. That it's absolutely essential when consuming media, and this is whether audio, visual, print, whatever, however you take this in, is you've got to keep asking, what am I missing? What am I missing here? Because even if you agree with the point of view of a particular media source, it doesn't do you well as a business leader if by following that track you become, as unfortunately some of these sources are sounding, a little stale. You're not growing. You're not going to be perceiving the opportunities that arise as all of the ongoing change happens. Our second question that people have to pay attention to is, what are the motivations? You always have to understand what are the motivations of these people. And that includes, by the way, the new media who have gotten their seats in the White House briefing room because they're very opinionated. They have very strong motivations in appearing there and so forth. In other words, you can't just absorb information. You have to think through what's the point of view? What's the motivation? What am I missing if I only listen to this source? And then, of course, our third question is Tom my friend or enemy? And you started to address that. And as you and I have been saying in our discussion right now, time is the friend of every business builder out there because there's too much uncertainty for us to take action. If we take action now, tomorrow, that action could be wrong. That we've got to remain alert here. We've got to be paying attention to what's happening, constantly asking, what am I missing? What's the motivation? But then also, we've got to be able to switch in time frames. We've got to be able to, once we see something that we develop a degree of confidence around, it's not going to be this week or next week, but maybe in a few weeks, we'll start to develop a degree of confidence about something, then we have to act quickly because we know that our competitors out there are observing the same things and are looking for the same opportunities. As soon as they see something, they're going to act quickly. And we can't be behind them on this because, frankly, Tom, this change is going to be happening over the full 4-year term here. And so we're going to have to be aware that change is going to be this constant, which is going to constantly create new opportunities, new ways of doing business, may get us to shift our marketplaces, may get us to think about the decisions we've made. You and I haven't talked about decision making for a time, but it's so critical now. You know that when we build businesses, we make decisions about how do we go about business? What's our marketplace? What's our culture as a business? What workforce do we need as a business? All of those decisions likely are going to have to change over the course of the next 6 months, even, certainly as we develop new technologies. Well, there's a spate of talking, Tom, so I'm going to stop here and throw it back at you.
So, so to take up on your point, Deirdre, about time, I was talking with somebody today who's number two in charge of a tech business, and they are using this time to keep their eye on the macro, but they're also using that time to look at how can I use AI agents to help me in running the business, because some of the new agents, and Grok 3 is a great example. I know, I mean, I've worked on Grok 3, but also DeepSeek. I mean, there's some various elements, and there are a lot of reasons why you might not want to use either one. Whatever. We're not trying to make those judgments. It's just that there are some new advances in the agents.
Right.
Even GPT has come up, Chat GPT has come up a little bit further too. So, and then Claude still has a major following in the programming world.
Right.
There's a lot of benefit that you can get to running your business, looking at these agents and saying, how could they help us run our business while we're trying to do this? So that's one aspect. And then the other thing is there's something that I think it's important to constantly during all this keep in mind. The administration is run by somebody who thinks of everything as a deal.
Yes.
And you can misunderstand that a comment that sounds to you like it is even provocative, you'd say is personally provocative. I would bet there's a lot behind the intent of that toward a deal. So you can pull away, it can become really entertaining if you keep that thought process in place when you're listening to, especially when you're listening to the president on how he is approaching things. Again, right or wrong, you and I are not trying to make that judgment. We're just saying, as we see it, it is so easy to say that was an uncalled for comment. But when one steps back and says, well, wait a minute, I'm watching this whole thing, I can see this playing out. I, you know, anyway, I was going to use an example I may not be able to use, so I'm going to stop on that one, just because I'm involved in some work that I can't really disclose all of the details to at this moment. But anyway, there's a lot of examples of that. One more example, Deirdre, and then I'm going to turn it back over to you. I think one of the things that you're seeing here is it's a fight of the bureaucracy against the change, trying to disrupt the bureaucracy and recast it. A lot of people call it different things, right? We've talked, some people call it the deep state, some people call it the blob, some people call it the entrenched bureaucracy, right? And
Right.
some people see it very differently. They see that as a huge institutional expertise that is being completely eliminated. And then we see a lot of spurious activity, right? Like those who claim that it was the United States FAA that was the responsibility of the Canadian airspace and running the Pearson Airport in Toronto and all that. Right. You just have to be really thoughtful about your sources of information. You and I have split up sources. You watch the traditional media, meaning not watch, but you read and listen to and observe the traditional media. I am on the alternative media. I spend my time there. And then the two of us, we compare what we're seeing. And there are days when you think I'm nuts with all the stuff I'm talking about. And then there are days when you fill me in because I missed the big picture that you were getting from one of the sources you wouldn't expect to get it from.
Right.
It's incredibly helpful. Now, our job is to do that and try to come up with a macro that will help people be able to deal with the micro in their industry, right? That's what we're doing for a living these days. But that's not easy to do. It takes an enormous amount of time and effort. And one of the things that we're observing is that it's interesting to watch this change happening across the world. And we're going to deal with that a little bit more in a future episode where we'll talk a little bit more about the world. But one thing to keep in mind is when you're fighting against this bureaucracy, our governments were built and designed to go one way, and that is only to grow. They're not designed to go the other way, right? And so all of the systems and all of the processes, including even out of Congress, are designed to go toward growth. And now the desire is to disrupt that. That is a hard process.
Right.
And that's not just in this country, it is all over the place. And you say part of that entrenchment has been what you've been reminding me. Just think about the social spending that's built into that, the entitlement programs that are built into that, and how that almost by definition talks about a long term. And then the fear is always, will you disrupt any of those? I am going to stop because we have about 7 or 8 minutes left, Deirdre, and I know there are a number of things you want to add to this equation before we sum up.
Um, a couple of scattered points. One, you mentioned AI agents. It's possible that some of our listeners haven't heard about these before because they're a very new feature of some of these LLMs. So we are planning, you and I, to film one of these videos explaining what's going on in AI within the next week. So don't worry, we'll explain what these new agents are and so forth and how they affect your work.
And the other thing about that too, Deirdre, you want to take on actually also all right, what's the whole thing with Elon Musk and Sam Altman and why is that become what it is and so forth. We're going to go into what's going on there and also the other tech mergers or acquisitions that are occurring.
Because it's very convoluted. There's so much going on in this space. And one of our goals is to come up with insights to help our listeners understand what's going on. And it's especially important because of the AI initiatives the Trump administration is going to be putting into place. And this ties in very much with business builders that as you are figuring out your macro, and understanding your macro and what you're going to do in terms of pursuing opportunities and so forth. AI in its various manifestations, not just the Gen AI, but also other emerging technologies are going to have to factor into your strategies, your go-to-market, your pursuit of marketplaces, and so forth going forward. So you need to understand that, which is why we're starting to dedicate some of our conversations to that. Another conversation we have upcoming is the whole Europe situation. And I'll stop right there because there's so much to say. You almost can't say one sentence. But in terms of what that means, not from a political point of view, but for business builders. How do business builders observe what's going on and start to think through the macros and then the micros in relation to this whole situation?
And Deirdre, the first macro is clearly going to be what's the story with VAT and tariffs, right? We know the intent. So listening to the deal maker, the intent is to go against the VAT with tariff, but we have to wait and see, right?
Yeah.
Because there's always that caveat. But if I have a free trade agreement, then all bets are off, right? So
Mhm.
back to you.
Okay. Well, I think it's worth reminding our listeners that the cabinet appointees are continuing to be approved by the Senate. They're moving into their positions, and this is why I think we're going to see an acceleration of change. The interesting one tomorrow is going to be the head of the FBI, because things may happen not only in relation to that vote, but then what happens on Friday after the vote happens, and so forth.
Deirdre, on that point, and I'm sorry to interrupt you again. I keep telling you I'm going to give you this time to you, and then I keep taking it back. Sorry. Um, we've been asked by a number of people to elucidate our view of the appointees from the point of view of a team. and building a team and how they fit in this team towards the objective of whatever the administration is doing. So we've been developing that also. So we'll have another thing that talks about the team themselves and the team that's being assembled. Is it, and how does that line up? And why were certain people selected, if there's even any logic behind it, and where we think how that could affect various things. It's fascinating. We've done a lot of discussion about it. You and I have a lot of research on it. So that is a very interesting discussion that's still coming.
Absolutely. And for everyone building a team, in a way, remember that you and I talked, Tom, in terms of this is the digital age. It's no longer the industrial age. But I think a lot of leadership thinking still thinks in terms of, say, leadership teams, which is what the cabinet is in industrial age thinking. But when you are assembling a team with different responsibilities for different subject areas, um, and with different capabilities within those different areas, you have to think about maybe it's time to develop a different team with different capabilities. So that's a thought, and we're going to be pursuing this going forward. I think also another thing that I want to talk about going forward is the whole issue of the computer readiness of the federal government. You and I have talked about this in relation to the work that the DOGE team is doing. And some of what the DOGE team is uncovering is that the basic computer systems, the basic software programs, the basic capabilities within the government departments are years behind what businesses are, what even I use in my little home office here. And so that this is going to have to be a focus going forward of the federal government to even bring it up to standard across all the departments so that we can deal with some of the issues that we as business builders are having to deal with deeply. Things like cybersecurity, the flow of information, protecting customer information, and so forth, and all of the different aspects of cybercrime that we have to deal with, even the basic use of, and we've heard that the lack of use of relational databases. I can't imagine running a business without having relational databases. So I want to put that out there as well, because I think in the interface between business and the federal government, and certainly this is a problem with local and state governments as well, we have to think through the interface here and the relationship, the flow of information between us as business builders out to various governmental entities, and what we have to start to think about when talking with various governmental entities to bring them up to the level where we need them to be performing, so that they can get us the information and the capabilities that we need as we pursue new markets in this digital age. The digital age here. So we've got to be ready for this. But that's a whole other topic for you, for the two of us to pursue. But I want to get this out on the table because it's a critically important point that you don't hear the media talking about. And
You do
that's an example of selection of stories.
yes, you do hear Elon Musk talking about it because
Yes,
he's the one that's facing it.
yes.
It's really fascinating. So Deirdre, our point is to all of us that are building businesses, our suggestion, and again, this is again just an opinion of one and one, is we would recommend hold course unless you're being affected by the change dramatically right away. Hold course, keep your eye on the macro trends, watch for the micro that matter to you, the kinds of things like we talked about, supply chain, your workforce, etc. Um, and just expect more change, and it's going to come rapidly. One of the points I know, Deirdre, that you wanted to make, and I wanted to make sure we made it, is that one of the things we're not hearing enough about is the personal tragedies that are going on in the affected areas of being hit by weather conditions. We still, we still have the California, we still have the North Carolina, Tennessee, we have the Kentucky, we also have Hawaii. We still are not comfortable that there's so many of these going on, and they're being, in many cases, we're not seeing a lot of coverage of that some elements I'm seeing in the alternative media, the Cajun Navy's up, up in Kentucky. But we're not seeing, again, this is your point about the selective coverage, and I'm sure that there are plenty of examples where we're not seeing it. But these are human tragedies that are occurring just within our own borders, much less all the other things. So we have to be thoughtful about the human aspect of this, including the people that are losing their jobs as a result of the retooling of government and the fact that good people and good works are always a victim in these things. And we feel incredibly, we have a lot of time for those people that were doing good work and that are really good employees that deserve, help. So we just encourage all of the people out there that are running businesses, when you have the opportunity to find somebody that was really skilled, that was doing a really good job somewhere, that you think you can fit into your team, please do.
Absolutely, Tom. And very much concerned about Kentucky right now, which is about to get hit with another storm and ice throughout the rest of the South and so forth. So it's been an interesting and long winter, I'll
It
say.
has. And unfortunately, it's not over yet.
Not
Uh,
over yet.
Despite that, it's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Tom.